Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and today we're welcoming back Joe Slack and a new guest, his design partner, Sylvain Plante. Together, they've created 14 Frantic Minutes, a puzzly, adrenaline-filled, real-time race against the clock co-op game that's currently on Kickstarter. Joe, Sylvain, welcome back to the Binge. How are you doing?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It is amazing having you guys on here. I just want to say congrats right off the top, given that you guys have actually funded. So that's awesome that you guys crossed that threshold today. I know the feeling. I've been there, right? When you're waiting for yourself to kind of cross that line, you're biting the nails, and then it's just like a breath of relief when you cross it. So, and that's in the first day and a bit. So congrats on that, guys. That's amazing.
Thanks, James.
So for those who don't know, I'm going to go through each of the guests here. So for people that don't know Joe, and I know a lot of people do know Joe, you're pretty popular in the industry, but maybe you can give our guests just a quick overview of kind of who you are, what you're about, and then we'll switch over to Sylvain if that's okay.
Sure. I'm a game designer. I'm a publisher. I write books on board game design and teach my own course, the board game design course. So I've been designing games for over 8 years, been doing it pretty much full time, working in the industry for the last 4, and just love coming on, your show and talking about games.
And I love talking games with you. And we get to run into each other quite a bit. We're both in the Toronto area here in Canada. So it's always cool to kind of run into you and see you. And thing I want to actually state for the audience as well is that Joe is joining the Board Game Binge team. So, in the coming months, you're going to be hearing Joe as a guest host, and you're going to be interviewing different people, and we're going to have you on the show, and we're going to intermix your interviews with my interviews, and it's going to be a cool experience. So I want to say thank you so much for agreeing to do that. Sylvain, like you're a doctor, and now you're doing board games. It's such a weird kind of dynamic there. So can you explain to people kind of what your background is and what you do kind of for a living?
Sure. But first of all, I'd like to apologize because I'm coming out of a bad bronchitis.
Oh, no.
My voice is getting better. I'm COVID negative. It was bad. I basically had no voice yesterday. So now this combined with the French accents, I'd be your audience may have a hard time. But I'm apologizing.
No problem. No problem at all.
Yeah, I work as I'm a cardiologist. I'm an interventional cardiologist. So I'm a heart plumber. It's a stressful job.
Yeah.
But, board game design has brought to me another way to keep my mind busy with something else. And also met a community. I met people that are amazing.
Yeah.
And, I've been designing games since 2010 with great guys like Joe Slack, Daryl Andrews, Josh Rung. Mm-hmm. And this is where I'm coming from. So when I have time available, I'm either playing games or designing some. And I'm making pride of making prototypes that look good.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. I mean, I first met you at Protospiel here in Toronto last year. And not only are you prolific in the number of games that I saw you had your hands on, but there's clearly a quality there. And I would walk up to the table and I'd say to Joe, "Oh my God, this game looks beautiful." And he said, "Yeah, Sylvain, he hand cut that all out himself. He went and had that printed, and that, that's his design." And, you can tell when people put that much care into, the visual look of a game, that clearly there's a lot of care put in behind the actual development of the game itself, right? Yeah. And the rules and how to put it together. So I didn't realize you'd been doing this since 2010. So that's like 12 years. That's amazing.
Yeah. And you know what? I have learned a lot.
Yeah.
This is the thing, I'm not making games with the hope they're going to be published. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Everybody likes to have their name on the box. But when I'm trying to design a game, I like to, if I'm going to present it to a publisher, that he would have a feel of what I have in my mind. So this table presence that is there, so they can see, oh, I know where it's going to that, where it's going with that. And how can I say that? I think I've delivered, and I'm so lucky that I'm working with guys like Joe, because I'm making a prototype and I say, Joe, can you balance this game now? he's the math guy. He's okay. We'll change a few things. So we'll keep the look. We'll make it now work a game.
Yeah, and he brings the balance in. And I think what probably helps with how well you work with different other designers is, from my experience working with you, again, I can speak to Prospiel, and other times I've talked to you in passing at our conventions and so forth, is how willing you are to talk about the game and really put some thought behind, oh, that's actually an interesting idea. That's something I can adapt. And you don't get that with every designer. And we all know a lot of designers, right? And sometimes you'll have somebody ask you for feedback, but they're really not looking for feedback. They're looking for confirmation.
Yeah.
Right. And you're one of these people I say, actually, you truly are looking for feedback. And I mean, I can think of one of the games where I'm like, my brother and I were playing and we're like, oh, this is really cool. And hey, did you consider doing this, this, and this? The next thing I talk to you, you're like, oh, I implemented all that stuff we talked about. And I was like, what? That was amazing. And so
I think you're actually referring to that, that Martini.
Yeah, the Martini game. Yeah.
So yeah, I think you or your brother mentioned something about making it more family oriented.
Yep. Like mine carts coming out of a mine shaft or something.
Week came with like a dwarf mining game. Yeah. So I think this is one thing that you have to, it's almost a must as a designer, that you have to be open to criticism.
Yeah.
And let things go and accept things that don't work in your game and move on. And also get the feedback of people and say, oh, this is good, but you should do it better.
Yeah.
And this is one thing I like to, when I work with Joe, we have the same, I think, the type of games we like are similar. We like games that you don't have to go through 30 pages of rules and sub rules to understand. You say, oh, this game is easy to learn. And then you start to play and say, oh, there's much more strategy in that game than I thought.
Yeah.
This is, the type of game that we like to design, that we like to play. And I think this is why we have such a good synergy.
That's fair. It's finding the genre, right? Like I think of, and these are the kind of games that are in my wheelhouse, right? I love a game where, and that's some of the tenets even of my company is we say, you have to be able to teach the game in less than 5 minutes, right? The game has to play in less than an hour. And again, that's not for every game, but that's for us. That's the games that we make. And then the last thing that we have as one of our key tenets is that, someone who's playing that game for the first time has to have a fair chance of winning. And that's something that and that's just out of my own personal preferences, right? And I think that's how we all work, is that things that you like in games, you want to kind of put into games that you create, right? And that's something that I find that there's nothing I hate worse than playing a game where I know that you've got zero chance until you've played it 2 or 3 times to kind of understand how it works and the mechanics. You want to at least have the illusion that you've got a fighting chance that first time you play. What about you, Joe? Is that like, how have you guys approached games? Because I'm seeing in your games like that as well, that a lot of your games seem, while there's a lot of depth there, they seem very quickly you can teach some of the game. Like I can't think of any of the games I've played of yours yet where I haven't been able to understand it very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's something that I really strive for too. And considering the fact that Sylvain is very much the same way, we like to play the game more than we like to learn a game. So we want to, make it as easy as possible for people to get into the game. Okay, in this game, you get these pieces. This is what you're doing. Like, get right into it. Like within a couple of minutes, we want people to get in there playing. And then, there might be the odd question that comes up here and there, what happens in this situation, but you can get people right into it. It's much easier than doing, a 20 or 30 minute teach of the rules, because by then everybody's forgotten what you said in the first, the first half of it. And people kind of get to that point where like, let's just play and we'll figure it out. Cause I'd rather play a game than just, sit here and listen. Yeah. So definitely something that we strive for is something that you learn very quickly, but once you get playing, you understand, oh, there's a depth of strategy to this, or there's so many different paths you can take. So it might seem easy and simple at the beginning, but there's much more to it when you get a little further into it.
Yeah. How do you frame soliciting feedback from people in situations where you have kind of a certain design you're looking for feedback on, but you don't want to turn it into something that's not? Because this is something I struggle with the most. I find in when I'm doing play testing with games that I'm working on, where we've got kind of these company tenets that we set up, right? Where we say, okay, these are the ways, these are the kind of games we want to make. And I find often you want to solicit feedback, and I feel bad because I don't want to discount somebody's feedback. But sometimes you start kind of going into this direction where they're trying to turn it into a different game, right? Or into a kind of game that they would like to play versus giving you feedback specifically on the mechanics of what you've created here. How do you deal with that yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing because you want to be open to all feedback. You want people to feel like they have a say in it, whether or not that's going to become part of your game. Obviously, you're the game designer, you have the ultimate say. Yeah. But I think part of it is just really understanding what the vision is for your game from early on. So is it going to be, a tense, chaotic experience? Is it going to be something where you want players to feel really clever? Is it going to be a really heavy take that game? Is it going to be a light party game where people are just going to be laughing? Just understanding what kind of experience you want players to have. And then you can filter all that feedback through that lens. So somebody tells you, oh, I think there should be more fighting in this game. There should be more dice rolling or whatever. Does that work with your vision? Is it in line with it? If it's completely not in line with your vision, then you might be like, that's a really good idea. I'm not sure that's necessarily where I want to go with it, but I'm going to jot that down, at least as a thought. Thank the playtester. Maybe that idea will work with another game. Yeah. Or if you take it in another direction, if it just doesn't work, but you really want to stick with that vision because it's very easy to go down every single different rabbit hole. And one person might say, I want more of this. And somebody says, I want less of this. Well, how do you decide? Like, you can't do both, obviously. So, you have to go with what's in line with your vision. But always, regardless of that, always be thankful to your playtesters and thank them for their ideas, write them down. And sometimes they also jump to conclusions or to solutions without identifying the problem. So sometimes they'll say, oh, I really want to be able to do this. I want to be able to take that from these people and stuff. And then sometimes you have to go back to that question. Well, why? Why do you want to do that? Well, maybe if you ask why enough times, you find it, well, they didn't have enough resources at the start of the game to do the things that they wanted. Or, maybe this is the type of game they want or that they enjoy. So maybe that's not necessarily your particular audience, but you have to ask those questions to figure out what the actual problem is. You can't solve something without knowing what the problem is first. So it's getting the playtesters to describe what they feel is the problem. And then you as the game designer come up with that solution. Sometimes they'll offer great solutions for that, but you just have to be wary about, jumping to solutions before you even know what the problem is.
Yeah, it's a great point. I always jot down the feedback. I find that there's been several times actually where I'll take the idea and say, you know what, not right for this particular game I'm working on, but I'm actually working on another game that's actually pretty brilliant for. And I'm gonna bring it over and adapt it to that, or maybe on the 2.0 of this one. So, but I think you're right. You definitely got to be grateful because people stop giving you feedback if they don't feel that it's at least being heard. And write it all down because you never know. There's going to be something in there. And sometimes I've been writing stuff down and that it has nothing to do with what I'm writing down, but it automatically triggers another idea of a solution to something else I'm working on. And I wouldn't have kind of, made those mental connections if I hadn't been jotting down that feedback in the first place. So I'm interested, how did you guys first meet? Was it just at these Protospiel events or how did you guys first connect?
I think it was Snakes and Lattes, wasn't it, Sylvain?
It was. And which year? I think I should check on mine.
Yeah, it's going back a few years, but it was one of the Snakes and Lattes. This one of our local board game cafes. James knows all too well. Yep. They used to do designer nights once a month at a couple of different locations. But we kind of met up there and started playing each other's games. I think we also had met a little online, and we were talking about a couple things, but we met up there and started playing games, and we discovered that we like similar types of games. And Sylvain, I think shortly after that, was working on a word game, and he's like, oh, I know you've been working on some word games too. Is this something you might be interested in collaborating on? And way to look at it. And I thought it was an interesting idea, and we just started working on that. And that actually became both of our first published games forward thinking. So it just came together.
Yeah, pretty quick actually. It was like.
And then, so 14 Frantic Minutes. Where did the idea for this game come from?
So this one was originally my idea. I had this idea for a game that I wanted to have a kind of a tension where you're trying to escape, but you're also being chased at the same time. Because there's a lot of games out there where there's a lot of time pressure and that kind of thing. So the original idea was you're captured by the in the lab by the scientist, and you've been kind of locked up, and you wake up and you're like, oh no, what's happened? We got to get out of here. So you and your friends have to, break out of your cells and try to find your way out of the lab. But meanwhile, he's, trying to hunt you down because, you're trying to escape, and he wants you to be subjects. So it was actually very dice heavy. At first, you were just trying to roll different combinations of dice to get out of your cell and to collect keys. And then you have to get the right matching keys to get through the right door. So you might grab a red key and a blue key, and then be like, oh no, he's right behind us. We got to get out of here, and use one of those keys and keep advancing and hope you have all the right keys to get out. And there were two different variations. It was one versus many, where one person was playing as like the henchman or the mad scientist coming after you. And then there's another version where everybody just was playing cooperatively, and there was more of a timer. So every so often this pawn would move, and if you got into your room, he caught you. And then I discovered Escape Curse from the Temple, which is a dice rolling game, a really fast-paced one where you're all trying to roll different symbols to get, gems and try to get out of there. Realized, okay, this is a little too similar. So I tried a bunch of different things and just wasn't coming up with anything to do with the dice. And I thought, I got to do something else other than dice with this. Put it on the shelf. And then one day, I was getting together with Sylvain, and I said, I want to show you this game and see if you have any ideas. I said, here's kind of the feeling I want for it. I was really going with that feeling, that tension feeling, the chase and escape. I said, I want that in here, but I want something other than dice. Do you have any ideas? And he said, yeah, I got some things percolating. And, the next time we meet up, he comes to me, and he's got like 4 different ideas for these different puzzly ideas. And we went through them. And the idea of connecting these circuits really shone through. And I was like, this is really interesting. And we were playing around with it, and we're like, okay, I think we got something here. And we just kind of took it and went with it from there.
Yeah. It was actually a game that I had, I called circuitry, where players were supposed to build the motherboard of a laptop to connect to USB to the all the ports, and have the circuit. And this game was going nowhere. And when Joe showed me his concept, I said, okay, I can recycle my idea to this. And I think this is how Dr. Demented was born. It was not called 14 Frantic Minutes initially, it's called Dr. Demented. And we started working with the idea of having people working with polyaminos and working together and try to eliminate the alpha player, which is amazing, because now with that design, people have their own pieces to work with. And the more we work with it, it's, there's a game there. This is working. It's better than chopping dice, because people are working with, they're trying to connect things together.
Yeah.
In a time sensitive fashion. And you've played as the game, it's there's tension there, all right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot of tension. That's clear. Would you like, when I looked at this originally, I'm like, oh, this is a polyomino game. But when I play it, yes, it's got the shapes, but it's not really a traditional polyomino game, though, is it? Really? Because you're kind of making these connections in these circuits. I'm going to show this on a screen in a second. But I thought it was quite clever what you guys have put together here, and the number of combinations and permutations seems infinite. I'm sure I'm sure you got an exact number how many combinations, permutations there are here, but there's quite a lot. I tried this at BreakoutCon. I did horrible at it. My kid did way better than I did, and teased me about it all the way home. But at the same time, she's like, Dad, when this goes live, please, please, please back it. I want a copy of this. So I did, right? I was one of the first backers of this game.
You were number one.
Was I number one? Oh, awesome.
Backer number one, yeah.
Yeah. But I got 2 copies. And the reason I want 2 copies is it's very thinky, right? And I have a father who is getting older now, and he's not he's retired, and he stays home a lot, and he was traditionally a very sharp guy that played a lot of chess. And for me, right away, I could see this game, and I said, you know what, I got to get a copy for my dad, because I know each day him just doing these circuits is going to be good for him with his brain exercises and just staying sharp. And I know it's the kind of thing he'd absolutely love. So that's why I grabbed 2 copies. I might grab a third, who knows? But I grabbed at least 2 copies. Awesome. It definitely was a good fit for the family. So I'm sharing on the screen here. Maybe you can walk us through exactly, Joe, how you play. I'm going to kind of scroll over the screen. Can you give us kind of an overview of how you play this game?
For sure, yeah. So basically, you start off with a board. It's a security card. So it's basically like, here is almost like a motherboard with all these chips on it, and you've got a switch, and you've got all these nodes around the board. And you flip over a challenge card, and it'll say you have to connect the switch to, let's say, red and yellow. So you have to take these polyomino pieces and fit them together on the board to make that circuit. But you have to work around these chips that are on the board that you can't play on top of. And as we were alluding to before, it's not just a matter of placing the polyominoes, but each one of them has like a lead, like a line going through them. And that's basically like where the current is. So you have to connect up the pieces in the right way, because if you piece 2 together, but they don't have the pieces matching up, then you have a false connection. You're not actually going to be able to connect up there. So you're frantically working together trying to do this, and everybody's got their own pieces. So if you're playing 4 players, everybody's got 5 pieces, and they're all somewhat unique, and you have to work together to put them there, but you can only ever touch your own pieces. So you won't ever have one person just taking control and doing everything. You have to work together and say, oh, I need an elbow here. Who has this? And then while you're doing that, you're trying to get it done within 2 minutes to move on to the next level. If you complete the circuit, move on to the next one, and then you move on to the next one, you can bank some time up. But there's a soundtrack that's running at the same time, and you can hear the heartbeat, and you can hear the sounds getting closer and closer, his footsteps, until he finally opens the door and he gives his cackle. And at that point, he advances. So you move him ahead to the next room, and that's going to happen every 2 minutes. And if he ever gets into your room, it's game over. If you can get to the end, to the 7th room, and solve the hardest room in all of the 7 before the 14 minutes is up, then you win as a team.
So one thing I noticed when I was looking at this game at BreakoutCon is right away I also thought about like team building. To me, it seemed like this would be a great kind of little team building exercise. You're relying on other members to have the right pieces, right, to make the circuit. Will there ever be like a version of this that's not co-op, where it's like kind of like 1 versus 1? Is there an option there with that at all, or?
We haven't really thought about that, because it really lent itself to a good cooperative game. And
Sure.
Actually, one of the other reviewers actually said that. He said this would be great for like a team building, like corporate event or something. We hadn't really thought about that. I mean, you could have 2 different people with the same games, with the same level, with the same cards, flip them over at the same time and race against each other, I suppose. But you actually need all the pieces, because there are some levels where you need, at least half of the pieces. So
I gotcha.
It would be hard to have 2 people going on 1 copy at the same time. But one interesting thing you said before too, about like your father playing this game potentially, is that even though there's this timed element to it, what we definitely saw, especially at BreakoutCon where you were at, if somebody failed, like they might not get through the 1st or 2nd level, they continue to work on that puzzle. They're like, I don't care about the soundtrack. I want to figure this out. And then when they do figure it out, they have that satisfaction, like, oh, okay, that's how it works. And they're like, hey, let me try again. So if somebody is kind of early to the game, or they're maybe not quite as fast, you don't necessarily have to play with the soundtrack. If you just wanted to see if you can accomplish this level, let's see if we can make these connections without the time pressure. You can just do that as, a thought exercise to see if you can accomplish it.
Oh, totally. It's almost like your morning kind of Sudoku, right? Like going through and say, okay, today I'm going to do 4 before I start my day. I'm going to do 4 levels, right? And play it out and see if I can get the circuits right. I mean, they're not easy. At least I didn't find them easy when I was going through. Now, maybe I'm just an idiot. I don't know. I was playing and my kid is like crushing it and my brother was crushing
No,
it.
no, it's a challenge. It's intentionally challenging, but the one thing is, it is a game where you can get better at it.
Yeah.
Because one of the main things is knowing the pieces. Because sometimes you get yourself in a situation, oh, I can't get around that corner or whatever, and you don't have that piece. So if you played a few times, especially like early on, and you're just like, let's just try to puzzle this out even without the soundtrack. Then you get to know the pieces, and then you get better at it, and then you can go through and you can beat it. And then you'll be like, okay, let's go to the next difficulty level. And there's also a set of 10 missions you can go through as well. So once you're kind of at that stage, we're like, okay, I've kind of mastered, getting through this. Let's try to get through all the missions together. And they get really, really hard by the end, where you're having to connect even all 5 nodes to the Switch on the last level.
No, that's amazing. I'm definitely going to put a link to this in the show notes for anybody who wants to check this out. It's 14, so the number 14, and then Frantic Minutes is how to find it on Kickstarter. If people wanted to follow you, Joe, do you have like a social media account that people can kind of follow you on and follow kind of this game and things like that?
Yeah. So on Instagram, I'm jslack22. And that's probably the best way to reach me. But other than that, you can also find all my stuff on Board Game Design Course, because I do free blogs and I have my books and courses up there as well.
Now, I know that, I mean, given that you guys are both prolific game designers, there's got to be something else the two of you are working on together. Is there another game you guys are working on? Is there something else that's going to be coming after this, or kind of what's the next steps?
Sylvain, do you want to talk about what?
Sorry, I'm gonna let you.
You'll let Joe do it. He's got a little tickle in the throat. All right.
Didn't want to shut you out there, but yeah, we're always working on more games. We have one called License to Grill that's been signed with another publisher that should be coming out at some point next year. Hopefully, it's
cool.
It's another polyomino game, but it's one where you have a shared grill and you're fighting for space on the grill and trying to kind of be a king or queen of the grill. And we also have a lot of other games on the go too. One of our favorites we're working on right now is called Mayan Curse, which is a game where you have to slide these big slabs and use. It's another very puzzly game. You're taking different stones with different symbols and trying to figure out the path to get all these gems and the sacred amulet at the end and get out. But there's a tension in it, because once you get far enough, you trigger these boulders, kind of Indiana Jones style, that are heading towards the entrance. And if you get stuck too far back, you might not get out before it all closes. So it's a very much push your luck and puzzly type of a game as well.
And how far out is that one? Is that one coming next year, or are you shopping around, or it'll be self-published, or what's the plan?
That's one we're still working out. We have talked to some publishers about it, and there's maybe some interest there, but we may wind up this being our next game. It's up in the air right now, but we might find a publisher, or it might be self-published at some point.
How do you find the balance? Because when you're self-publishing, it's like an immense amount of work on top of just designing, right? You're getting into sourcing and distribution and the marketing and all that. So how do you find balance with that, given that you're still trying to work on your game designs and always keep that kind of engine running, right? Because there's a long development cycle in these games. You need to have a number of them kind of in development at different stages, but to be doing that and at the same time having to manage the manufacturing and marketing and distribution of this game as well as your Relics game, like how do you balance that?
Yeah, it definitely can be a challenge. And I mean, I just love making games, so there's no shortage of games in the works. But as somebody who's working mostly by himself and partnering with others like Sylvain, you can only release so many games in a year, because it is all that work, especially if you're doing Kickstarter, because it can often take a year or close to that to go from a Kickstarter campaign to getting it delivered to everybody. So at most you're going to be putting out 1 or maybe 2 games a year, if you're doing this kind of on your own. If you have a team of people and you have distribution and the retail connections, then you could do more of that, especially if you're taking on other designers' games. Yeah. But I just love working on games of all different styles. But I think it's also important to understand what your brand is. So with my previous game, Relics of Rajvihara, and the expansion Montallo's Revenge, it was really very much a puzzly type of game that makes you feel good when you figure it out. So 14 Frantic Minutes very much aligned with that. So, keeping it on brand. So other
Yeah.
games that are kind of puzzly nature, you can play solo or with, multiple players. That really fits that. But then there's other games that, I'm working on or that I'm working on with Sylvain that don't necessarily fit that mold. And I don't want to really be held to only making games of a certain type. If I have an idea for a party game, if I have an idea for a strategy game, I'm going to, work on that if it's interesting to me. So the great thing is there's publishers out there that focus on those types of games that are really good at those, that know how to market those and have that audience. So I know that certain games, this would be much better done by this publisher over here than I could do. So it's just kind of finding that balance.
Yeah, fair. And I'm wondering just really quickly, and I know we're going to cover this in another episode coming up, and one of the first ones that you do, but Protospiel North. Can you do a quick plug on that for people? Because I know it's up and coming, and I want to make sure if there's anybody, within driving distance or travel distance to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, that they have an opportunity to attend that, because it really is an awesome event. Can you talk just a little bit about that? Do you mind?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's happening November 25th to 27th. It's basically a weekend, Friday to Sunday, happening here in Toronto. And it's a game design weekend. Basically, a whole bunch of game designers and play testers as well get together, play test each other's games, give time back, get feedback, like we were talking about, to make all of our games better. That's really the intention, is going there, presenting our games, having people play them and make them better. So there's going to be, tons of designers there, and people can come. If you're not a designer, you can just come as a play tester and just do a weekend of playing, games that could be the next thing. You never know.
Yeah. And then how do they buy tickets to that? Where do they go to get tickets for that?
I don't know if I'll be able to maybe share a link with you, because the URL is a little long for that. But if you look up Protospiel
North or whatever,
Protospiel North, you can find our Facebook group. There's an event for the Facebook group there, so that's probably the best way to find it. And there's a link right there to buy tickets as well.
Awesome. Well, after this show, I'll get a link off you. I'll drop that in the show notes as well, so people have a quick click that they can go to. Board Game Binge Podcast Facebook group, the private Facebook group. Any of those of you out there listening that are not part of it yet, feel free to join. We will also put a link in there for you to get there quick. I hope to see some people out there. It was a blast. I went last year. I didn't prototype any games last year. I just went as a play tester. And man, you are amongst friends and you are amongst your community when you go to this place. It is awesome. So I can't wait again till this year.
Absolutely.
Guys, congrats again on this campaign. I'm so excited for you. I'm glad it's funded, because I personally just want to get my copy. And I want to wish you all the best in this coming year with this game.
Oh, thanks so much for all your support, James. I really appreciate it. And great chatting with you.
No worries.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.